Kingfisher Bay presented itself as a city of futures. Built on the bones of old fisheries, it was an East Coast port that never slept, where neon signs bled into the perpetual salt spray, and the fog rolled in thick. Tasting of brine and diesel, tonight the city was celebrating its own reflection. Carraro Holdings, a name whispered with equal parts reverence and fear, had bankrolled the new Skylight Pier. It was a monument of glass and steel thrusting into the black Atlantic, and its grand opening demanded fanfare. Eva Monroe, 29 years old, navigated the crowd with the practiced efficiency of a woman running on caffeine and deadlines. By day, she was a freelance photographer chasing assignments that barely paid. By night, she was a delivery driver, racing against the clock. Tonight, the jobs overlapped. Her 8-year-old daughter, Nova, held her hand tightly, the other clutching a half-eaten pretzel. Eva had brought her to see the fireworks, a flimsy excuse that covered the real need, a freelance gig to capture the pier's inauguration. "Mom, can we get closer to the water?" Nova asked, her voice nearly lost in the ambient murmur of the gathered elite and the distant bark of seals. "Stay close. Sweetie, I need to get the right angle when the lights go up," Eva murmured, adjusting the settings on the heavy camera hanging from her neck. She was a ghost here, slipping between clusters of mink coats and tailored suits, invisible to their world. Then the crowd parted. Bastian Carraro moved like the center of gravity. He was the billionaire Don, the public face of Carraro Holdings and the unseen hand of the Orchid Syndicate, a network that wove itself through logistics and real estate, masking a deeper, older trade. He was immaculate in a dark suit, but it was not his wealth that held the eye. It was the scar, just visible above the knot of his silk tie. A pale, perfect crescent was carved into the skin over his right collarbone. Eva froze, her photographer's eye assessing the light, the security, the man. But Nova, unfiltered and driven by the relentless curiosity of childhood, saw something else entirely. She tugged free from Eva's grip. The murmur of the crowd died down as Bastian paused to greet a city councilman. In that sudden pocket of near silence, Nova's voice, clear as a bell, rang out. She had taken 3 steps toward him. "Mister, your scar looks just like mine." A collective intake of breath, the air turned brittle. Eva felt a cold dread wash over her, a sensation worse than the biting ocean wind. Tabloid cameras, hungry for any crack in the Carraro facade, swiveled toward the small girl. Bastian Carraro turned. His movements were economical, smooth. He did not look annoyed. He looked intrigued. He crouched, bringing himself down to Nova's level, a gesture of disarming politeness. His eyes, dark and assessing, flicked from Nova's face to the tiny hand she now held up, pointing to her own chest, where the collar of her jacket was zipped high. "Does it now?" His voice was low, a cultivated rumble. But as he looked, his gaze sharpened. He saw the child, but he registered the implication. It was not a common scar. It was the precise, silvery track of a complex congenital vascular intervention, a mirror shape, rare and specific. Eva lunged, her arm snaking around Nova's waist, pulling her back flush against her own body. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her face burning. She turned to flee, to disappear back into the anonymity she relied on. "She didn't mean to bother you." Bastian rose slowly, his eyes never leaving them. He watched Eva's panicked retreat, her face pale under the harsh pier lights. He saw her lips move as she whispered frantically to her daughter, "Nova, you can't just talk to people like that." He leaned toward his consigliere, Mael Rivera, a man who blended into the background like a shadow. "Find out who she is," Bastian ordered, his voice flat. Eva was already pushing through the throng, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached the edge of the pier, near the cold, black water that lapped against the new pylons. The first firework exploded overhead, a violent splash of sapphire and gold. It painted the harbor. reflecting on the water that looked as dark and still as marble. Another explosion, this one lower, faster, a stray shell, perhaps, or a signal. Eva watched Mile Rivera, still standing near Bastion, suddenly lift one hand instantly. The perimeter of dark-suited security men shifted, tightening their formation. Eva's phone vibrated in her pocket, a text from an unknown, encrypted number. Her blood ran cold. "Get your daughter off the pier now. NASC is setting a trap." NASC, the North Atlantic Security Commission, a quasi-private agency that claimed to mediate criminal conflict for the good of the economy. In reality, they were a shark tank, and Carraro was the whale they circled. Eva hesitated, her mind racing. A trap for who, Carraro, or for her? As if summoned by her fear, a high-pitched whine cut through the air. A high-end reconnaissance drone, the kind used by surveyors and security firms, suddenly sputtered. It listed, its lights flashing erratically, before malfunctioning. It dropped from the sky, clattering onto the boardwalk just yards in front of her. A tiny silver memory card was taped to its chassis, emblazoned with the stylized orchid of Bastion Syndicate. A thick black line was drawn through the logo, crossing it out. A few yards away, Bastian Carraro's head snapped up. His gaze locked onto Eva and Nova, just as the drone failed. He saw the child again, the terror in the mother's eyes, and he recognized the pattern, not just the scar, but the setup. He turned to Mile, his face a mask of cold command. "Open the estuary route, now." The fireworks finale began, a deafening barrage of sound and light. It was the perfect cover for the thrumming, metallic beat of helicopter rotors spooling up in the dark. The memory hit Eva not as a gentle recollection, but as a physical impact, sharp and cold as the night she had fled Kingfisher Bay. It was 9 years ago. She wasn't a photographer then, but a data intern at Viridian Lab, a biomedical research shell company under the vast umbrella of Carraro Holdings. She'd been tasked with data migration, a mundane job that became terrifying when she stumbled into a hidden directory. It was not medical research, it was a genetic census of the port's citizens, data being actively extracted by NASC. The files were flagged for social risk control, eugenics cloaked in corporate jargon. She remembered the power outage, the sudden oppressive silence of the server room, and him. Bastian Carraro had walked in, not with a flashlight, but with the confidence of a man who owned the darkness. He was there for an internal audit. He was younger then, but the same coiled intensity was present, the same scar, a pale shadow on his collarbone. The air between them had crackled, an instant, dangerous static. He had kept his distance, his questions precise. He knew the data she was handling was sensitive, but he had not known. She was sure. What she had found in the hidden partition. Days later, the NASC inspection happened. It was not an inspection, it was a digital massacre. Servers were wiped, hardware smashed, but Eva, paranoid and quick, had already copied the core directory, NASC's identity list, onto an encrypted drive. She had fled the building as alarms blared. He had found her, not in person. A burner phone, delivered by a courier who vanished, buzzed with a single untraceable text. It gave her an escape route, a new name, and a wire transfer large enough to disappear. Bastian Carraro had secretly helped her flee Kingfisher Bay, not for her, she knew, but to keep a loose end from being caught in the crossfire between his Orchid Syndicate and NASC. He had cut her loose. No number, no way back. She had discovered she was pregnant 2 months later, alone in a motel room in a city she did not know. There was no proof. There would never be proof. Just a 1 in a million genetic quirk, a connective tissue variance that necessitated a complex, life-saving heart surgery for her newborn, a surgery that left a rare, crescent-shaped scar identical to the one on the man who had set her adrift. Now, back in her cramped apartment, Nova finally asleep, Eva pieced together the previous night, the anonymous text, the off-time firework that signaled the security shift, the malfunctioning drone delivering a memory card with a crossed-out orchid logo. It was theater. Someone was deliberately skillfully, painting a target on her back, forcing a connection between her and Carraro. Miles away, in a room paneled with wood so dark it drank the light, Bastian Carraro convened his council. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and new trouble. Mile Rivera, his consigliere, sat perfectly still, his power a quiet, contained force. Sienna Quill, the silent brain who ran Carraro's legitimate charitable foundations, watched everyone, her fingers steepled, and Cade Lupo, the hot-headed boss of the Carraro docks, was already pacing. "Nask sent this an hour ago," Bastian said, sliding a tablet across the polished mahogany. It was not a request, it was a subpoena for cooperation, citing suspected money laundering through the new Skylight Pier. "It's the pier, the girl, the scar," Cade growled. "It's a setup. They're making a narrative." Mile Rivera leaned forward. His voice was always calm, reasonable, which made his suggestions all the more lethal. "The narrative is unfortunate, but solvable. NASC needs a scapegoat for their investigation. We give them one." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The freelancer, this Eva Monroe, she was at the pier. She caused the disturbance. We leak that she's been trying to extort the family, using her child. We claim she's the one who planted the data, perhaps in league with a rival. We pin the leak on her." Sienna Quill's head lifted, her gaze sharp, but she remained silent. Bastian looked at the tablet, his expression unreadable. He tapped the screen, darkening it. "No." The room went silent. "Bastian," Mile began, his tone patient, "this is the cleanest path. It contains the problem." "It's a sloppy path," Bastian countered, his voice dropping to a low growl. "And I don't care. You will not touch her. You will not touch the child." He stood, the sudden movement a dismissal. "I'll talk to her." He looked at Mile. "I'll handle this." He sent the message the same way he had 9 years ago, a new burner phone, delivered to Eva's delivery route driver, who handed it to her with a shrug, a single text. "We need to talk. Your terms." Eva stared at the phone. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, sharp rage. It was pulling her back in. The one man she had spent nearly a decade running from, she replied, her thumb jabbing the screen. "Public tonight, Argos Bakery, 10 o'clock. She added another condition. "No third party, no devices, or I walk, and I bring mine." The reply was immediate. Done. Argos Bakery was a pool of warm, yellow light in a dark, working-class neighborhood. It was open 24 hours, smelled of cinnamon and burnt sugar, and was always, blessedly, full of witnesses. Cops on their night shift, nurses ending a double, taxi drivers. Eva sat in a booth by the window, Nova asleep in the seat beside her, her head pillowed on Eva's jacket. She had nowhere else to put her. A dead man's switch was active on her own phone in her pocket, set to upload the entire NASC identity list to a dozen news agencies if she did not check in by 11. She was not the same naive intern who had run 9 years ago. He arrived 3 minutes late at 10:03 p.m. Eva watched him through the steamy window of the bakery. He did not arrive in a motorcade. He came alone, a long shadow detaching itself from the rain-slicked street. He wore a dark peacoat, collar turned up, no umbrella. He paused at the door, scanning the interior, his gaze sliding over the cops, the nurses, and finally, locking onto her in the booth. He slid in opposite her, bringing the scent of cold rain and expensive wool. The plastic-covered menu felt cheap beneath his hands. "You brought her," he said. It was not an accusation, just a fact. His eyes flicked to Nova, who was stirring, awakened by the new presence. "She goes where I go," Eva said, her voice low. Her hand was in her pocket, thumb resting on the screen of her phone. The dead man's switch was active, on the table. Her old DSLR camera sat face down, its lens pointing at nothing. Nova blinked, rubbing her eyes, and then she smiled, her sleepiness evaporating. "It's the Scar Man." Eva winced, but Bastian's expression did not change. "Nova, with the innocent boldness that had started this, leaned forward. She pulled down the zipper of her pajama top, just an inch, revealing the pale, crescent-shaped line against her small chest. "See, it's just like yours." The bakery, with its scent of cinnamon, suddenly felt like a vacuum. The clatter of plates and the drone of the fluorescent lights faded. Bastian looked at the small scar, then, with deliberate slowness, he reached up. He did not just loosen his tie, he pulled the silk knot completely free, tossing the tie onto the vinyl seat beside him. He undid the top 2 buttons of his stark white shirt. He tilted his neck, lowering his collar, exposing the skin above his right collarbone. There it was, not just similar, it was a near-perfect mirror, 2 crescent moons, signature marks of a rare connective tissue variance that complicated any surgery near the aorta. Eva felt the air leave her lungs. No one said the word father. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Bastian finally broke it, his gaze lifting to Eva's, bypassing the child between them. Who was the surgeon? Dr. Aris at the pediatric hospital in Philadelphia. Eva's voice was sharp, clinical. He had to use a heterologous graft because the aortic arch was too narrow. He called the suture pattern the signature. Bastian's eyes closed for a single, heavy beat. He had heard Aris use that exact term. It was a detail only someone who had been in those sterile, terrifying consultation rooms would know. The bell above the bakery door chimed. 2 men entered. They were built like refrigerators, wearing cheap suits that did not fit their shoulders. They were not here for donuts. They scanned the room, their eyes too bright, too quick. Cops looked tired. These men looked hungry. They settled at the counter, backs to the room, but their reflections were clear in the steel-fronted pastry case. Eva's hand, the one on the table, tensed. She subtly tilted her coffee cup, the base scraping a faint sound, moving it 2 inches to the left, a signal. A prearranged distress move she had once learned in a hostile environment training course. Bastian caught it instantly. He did not look at the men. He looked at her. He placed his large, warm hand directly over hers on the tabletop. It was not a romantic gesture. It was a lockdown, a claim. "Don't," he murmured. Eva's pulse jumped, a frantic bird under his palm. She could feel his own steady, slow thrum against her skin. "They're NSA," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "I know." He gave her hand a brief, hard squeeze, an order. "So we're going to leave." He raised his voice, pitching it just loud enough to carry, the tone shifting from lethal quiet to sharp annoyance. "Is that what this is about? After all this time? You call me down here for money." Eva stared, momentarily stunned. Then she caught up. Her eyes flashed with a genuine fire, fueled by 9 years of fear. "Money. You think I'd contact you for money? I didn't contact you at all." "Right," he scoffed, loud enough for the men at the counter to hear. "You just happen to be at the pier. You just happen to have my daughter." "She's my daughter," Eva hissed, rising from the booth, grabbing her jacket. "Fine," Bastian said, standing, throwing a $20 bill on the table. "I'm not doing this here." He scooped up a sleeping Nova, who mumbled but did not wake, settling her against his chest as if he had done it 100 times. Eva, her face a mask of convincing fury, grabbed her camera and bag. "The kitchen," she snapped. "Now." They moved fast, a blur of practiced anger. The 2 NASC agents were already turning, surprised by the sudden escalation. "You're not leaving," one shouted. "Watch me," Bastian growled, and pushed Eva through the swinging doors marked "Employees Only." The kitchen was a chaotic landscape of steel tables and cooling racks. A startled baker looked up, flour on his face. "Back door," Eva ordered. Already moving, she did not look back. She saw the security camera mounted above the walk-in freezer, its red light blinking. Without breaking stride, she unzipped her bag, grabbed her heavy DSLR, aimed, and threw it. The camera, her livelihood, smashed into the camera, sending both crashing to the floor in a spray of plastic and glass. Bastian, Holding Nova with one arm, kicked open the alley door. "I'm impressed," he grunted as the cold, wet air hit them. "Shut up and move!" His car was parked a block away, a dark, anonymous sedan that looked more like a battering ram than a luxury vehicle. He put Nova in the back, buckling her into the integrated child seat with a surreal expertise. Eva slid into the passenger seat, soaked and shaking. The doors locked with a heavy, solid thud. For a long minute, they just sat, the only sound the rhythmic swish-swish of the windshield wipers cutting through the downpour. Eva finally broke the silence. She reached into her bag, past the broken shards of her backup lens, and pulled out a manila envelope. She tossed it onto the dashboard. "The pier wasn't an accident, neither were your men at the counter, but you already know that." He did not open it. "What is it?" "Photos. My angle. From the rooftop across the street, before the fireworks. Long lens," she pointed. "That's your man, Mile Rivera, and that's the envelope he gave a ranking NAS agent, the same agent who was in that bakery." Bastian leaned his head back against the leather. He let out a long, slow breath that fogged the inside of the car. "You think I don't see the hands on my neck," he said, his voice weary. He was not the Don now. He was just a man in a cage. Nassi wants the pier's data hub, the whitewashed gangs, the Hallow Kings, want the waterfront. They are all squeezing. Mail. He trailed off. Mail thinks he's protecting the family by making a deal with the devil, or perhaps by becoming one. They looked in the rearview mirror. At the same time, Nova was fast asleep, her breathing peaceful, oblivious to the storm she was in. Eva and Bastian looked at each other. It was the same look from 9 years ago, in the dark server room, an acknowledgement of a pull, a recognition. They had both chosen distance to keep their worlds from colliding. And now, the collision had already happened. "They won't stop," Eva said. "Not now that they've seen her. They'll use her. They'll use me to get to you." "I know." He turned to her, the dim streetlights painting shadows under his eyes. "So you have a choice. You can run again. I'll give you the money, a new name, a new life. I'm better at it now. They will never find you. Or 3 nights. That's how long I have until the solstice gala. 3 nights. I bring you inside. You're my shadow. I'll show you what I'm doing to fight them, what Mile is doing to help them. I'll show you the books, the operations, the monster." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "And if, after 3 nights, you see a devil, I'll give you the first option myself. You disappear, and I'll burn down anyone who tries to follow you." Eva studied his face, the scar, the hard jaw, the tired eyes. This was not a plea. It was a proposal, as cold and hard as steel. "You'll show me everything." Everything. She looked out the wet windshield at the blurry neon lights of the city that wanted to swallow her. Running had not worked. Hiding had failed. "One condition," she said. "Name it." "She," Eva nodded toward the back seat, "is never a bargaining chip. She's never a tool, or I will burn you down myself." A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Agreed." He put the car in gear. The promise hung in the rain-filled air between them. It was not a promise of love. It was a contract for the truth. Night 1. The agreement was less than 12 hours old. Bastian did not take her to a boardroom. He took her to the waterfront, to the humming, cavernous belly of Warehouse 17. Eva wore a hard hat and a high-visibility vest over her dark clothes, a clipboard in her hand, her temporary ID, procured by Bastian, identified her as a third-party lighting inspector. Her access card, however, was not from Carraro Holdings. It was a one-time passkey from the Bureau of Corporate Integrity, a civilian oversight group. A BCI key opened almost any corporate lock in the city, under the guise of public audit. "NASC sealed this container 3 days ago," Bastian said, his voice low, echoing slightly in the vast space. He pointed to a standard red shipping container, marked with the digital lock of the Security Commission. They inspected it for contraband. They found nothing. but they left a digital footprint. You're breaking into your own warehouse, using a BCI key to steal data from a container NASC already cleared, Eva asked, her breath pluming. We are not stealing, Miss Monroe. We are retrieving a backup. He swiped the BCI key, the lock beeped and hissed open. Inside was not cargo, but a small, rack-mounted server still blinking. They wiped the warehouse server logs for the past 72 hours, Bastian explained, plugging in a drive. But they missed the container's internal diagnostic log. We're not looking for what they inspected. We're looking for a record of them. Eva's fingers flew over the portable terminal she'd brought. She was faster than he was at this, a ghost in the machine. I'm in access logs. They're sloppy. They used a brute force entry on your mainframe from this terminal, then wiped the log. But the terminal itself recorded the outbound attack. Proof they planted evidence, as Bastian said. Proof they planted something, Eva corrected, her eyes scanning lines of code. She was parsing file structures, not just access times. They were running a secondary program while they were in something called Project Mirror. Her scrolling stopped. Her body went rigid. Bastian. Her voice was different, sharp, thin, cold. What is Project Mirror? He turned, seeing the look on her face. I don't know. A code name. It's a biometric algorithm, she said, her voice shaking. It's designed to splice and graft genetic markers, to create medical deepfakes, to fake illnesses, or cures, or paternity. She clicked on a subfolder. It was the target profile, the source model for the algorithm's first test. It was a file containing preliminary data, pulled from the hospital records of the Philadelphia Pediatric. It was a file on a child with a rare cardiovascular anomaly. It was Nova. Bastian saw the name on the screen and the world tilted. He had seen 1,000 horrors, but this was a violation that cut deeper than flesh. They were using her rare genetic map, as a template. Eva's hand was pressed to her mouth. She was not crying. She was incandescent with a rage that eclipsed his own. They will not touch her, she whispered. Bastian put his hand on the server rack, his knuckles white. Nobody, he replied. Nobody touches her. Night 2 was a different kind of infiltration. The Rookery was the Orchid Syndicate's inner sanctum, a private club that did not exist on any map. All dark wood, cigar smoke, and unbreachable contracts. Eva was there as his consultant, a role that made the older members of the syndicate bristle. She watched from a shadowed alcove as Mile Rivera held court, his movements smooth, his voice a placating balm. He was negotiating with the Hallow Kings, a new, volatile street gang. Eva's new camera, a loaner from Bastian's private security, had a lens that could see in the dark. She watched Mile laugh, clasp the gang leader's hand, and with his other hand, make a subtle gesture. Thumb tucked, 2 fingers extended, a signal she had seen before. In surveillance photos, it was an old NASC field signal for payment received. Later, Bastian showed her the monster. He summoned a man to the club, a small-time pier owner. Bastian did not yell. He spoke quietly, laying out a ledger of debt, ending with a simple choice. Sign over the pier, or be thrown to the wolves. The man was weeping, begging. Eva watched, her face impassive. Bastian had not looked at her once. The man signed. As he was being escorted out, Bastian said, "Send his file to the MOCD." Eva raised an eyebrow. He was using underage kids from the shelter system to run his crews, Bastian said, finally looking at her. 8, 9 years old, kept them hooked, paid them nothing. Eva met his gaze. The calculated cruelty of the meeting snapped into focus. It was not just business. It was a specific, cold justice. "You're punishing an adult for exploiting minors," she asked, her voice flat. "Continue." He held her gaze, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Their morals were not clean, but on this, their lines were drawn in the same place. Night 3. They wore the gray jumpsuits of the building's maintenance crew, pushing a cleaning cart into the service elevator of the Carraro Tower. They were heading for the data spine, the subterranean server hub that was Bastion's digital brain. Mile will have his own security on the core, Eva said, her voice tight, echoing in the metal box. Which is why we are not going to the core, Bastion said. We're going to the cooling shaft. Sienna's orders. The elevator opened onto a concrete floor, and there, waiting, was Sienna Quill, the silent brain, the charity runner. She held a tablet. I've suspected Mile for months, Sienna said, no preamble. He's been running a shadow budget through the foundations, but I lacked a witness. You, she nodded to Eva, are a very loud witness. Sienna led them to a ventilation grate. Mile's team is watching the main server room, but the mirror files are not just on the server. They are backed up on an air-gapped system tied to the building's original schematics. Here. Eva and Bastion climbed into the shaft, into a world of humming ducts and fiber-optic bundles. Eva jacked in, her terminal glowing in the dark. Sienna, on the outside, fed her the access keys. I'm in, Eva whispered. It's all here. The project, the NASC collaboration, the digital signature. It's not just mail, it's MOCD. The Metropolitan Organized Crime Directorate is co-signing the project. They're all in bed together, Bastion said, his voice grim. Downloading, Eva said. 70% Sinon I. A high-pitched, localized alarm suddenly blared from Sienna's tablet. Not a building alarm, a personal one. Mile, Sienna said, her voice urgent. He just got a proximity alert for the shaft. He must have bugged the original plans. He's coming. 5 minutes. I'm at 99, Eva hissed. Come on. Got it. She ripped the drive out. This way, Bastion said, grabbing her hand. He ignored the ladder. He pulled open a heavy insulated panel marked smoke evacuation. It was a vertical shaft, pitch black, barely 3 feet wide. Go, he ordered. Eva scrambled in. Bastion followed, pulling the heavy door shut behind them, plunging them into absolute darkness. They could hear the faint sound of booted feet running on the concrete floor outside. They were pressed together, chest to back, in the tight, cold metal tube. Eva could feel the heat radiating from Bastion's body. His chest was hard against her back. His breathing was loud in her ear, steady, while her own was ragged. They were trapped, hidden and for a moment impossibly close. The Hesper Lighthouse was not a house. It was a fortress built into the cliffside, a forgotten safe house from Bastion's grandfather's era. Its walls were thick, ancient stone that smelled faintly of salt and ozone. Through the massive, arched windows, the Atlantic thrashed below, a gray and white expanse. Sienna had taken Nova, not to her own home, but to a secure, unmarked apartment run by her foundation, staffed with 2 women who looked like librarians but moved like guards. Nova was safe, bundled up with hot chocolate and a movie, blissfully unaware of the night's escape. Now, Eva and Bastion were alone. The adrenaline from the data spine had worn off, leaving a vibrating, raw-nerved exhaustion. A fire roared in the massive stone hearth, the only real warmth in the cavernous room. Eva stood facing him, her arms crossed, a barrier against the cold and him. She's not a chess piece. Bastion, Eva said, her voice quiet but brittle. You don't get to use her. If you are her father, you do not get to use her as a shield or a bargaining chip or a reason. Bastion had been shrugging off the damp maintenance jumpsuit, revealing the dark clothes beneath. He stopped, his hands still. Is that what you think I'm doing, that this is leverage? I don't know what to think. You've given me 3 nights of shadows and half-truths. The truth is, I don't want to use her, Bastion said, his voice rough. He took a step, closing the distance between them to a few feet. I want to be allowed to be responsible for what I did, for who she is. The gap between them was small, just a few feet of empty air, but it held 9 years of running, of fear, of secrets. It held the danger of the last 3 nights, the shared risk, the impossible proximity in the smoke shaft. The truth had shortened the distance. He looked down at her hands, still fisted at her sides. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. He did not try to take her hand. He gently, barely, brushed his thumb over the back of her knuckles. He felt the calluses, the rough, hardened skin from her camera, from delivery boxes, from a life of hard work. It was a map of her survival. He traced one line, a silent acknowledgement, a question, a plea for permission. Eva's breath hitched. She did not pull away. Her fingers uncurled, just slightly. It was all the answer he needed. He stepped in. He did not grab her. He gathered her. His arms came around her in a way that was more shelter than passion. His chin rested on the top of her hair, and he just held her. His large, warm hand splayed flat against the middle of her back, offering his strength as a shield. He felt her whole body, taut as a bowstring, begin to tremble. She was not crying. She was finally letting the tension of a decade break. She tilted her head back. Her eyes were dark in the firelight, searching his. He lowered his head. The first kiss was slow, hesitant. It was a question. It was lips brushing, a discovery of texture and warmth, a taste of salt and rain. It was not enough. She rose on her toes, her hands coming up to grip the front of his jacket. She pulled him down, and the kiss changed. It was no longer a question. It was an answer. It was a release of 9 years of pent-up fear and buried attraction. It was the frantic, breathless acknowledgement that they were both still here, still breathing. Eva tugged at his heavy jacket, the one he had worn over his clothes, needing it gone. A button snagged in its hole. A frustrated sound escaped her, and suddenly, they both let out a short, sharp laugh against each other's mouths. The tension shattered like glass, replaced by a sudden, aching need. "Help me," he whispered, and she fumbled the button free, pulling the jacket from his shoulders and letting it drop to the stone floor. His hands were in her hair, fingers tangling, as his mouth found hers again. Her fingers interlaced behind his neck. He took a half step back, just to look at her, his eyes dark and asking a question his voice did not. She answered by tugging him back, pulling him toward the thick, bearskin rug in front of the hearth. They sank to the floor, a tangle of limbs. It was not a graceful movement, it was urgent. They lay on the thick fur, the fire warming their skin through their clothes. Their movements were a rhythm, a desperate rediscovery. His hand slid from her hair to the side of her neck, his thumb finding the frantic pulse point, feeling the beat of her life against his skin. He held it, anchoring her. She moved her own hand, sliding it under his shirt, her palm flat against the hot skin of his back. She felt the muscles, hard as iron, finally begin to uncoil beneath her touch, the tension of his world easing under her hand. "Eva," he breathed, his forehead pressed to hers. "Here," she whispered back. "I'm here." "With me? With you?" There was no grand declaration, no promise of forever, just the raw, fundamental confirmation of the present, of consent, of choice. They lay like that for a long time, their breathing slowing, their bodies pressed together. The fire began to die, its roaring subsiding to a crackle. Outside. The only sound was the deep, rhythmic crash of the waves against the cliffs. He held her, his arm draped over her waist, her head on his chest. He spoke to the shadows on the ceiling. "I am afraid," he said, the words torn from him, a confession he had never made, not of Nesk, not of Mael, or any of them. He shifted, looking down at her. "I'm afraid, Eva, because if I let myself love you, if I fail to protect you, and her, I will never forgive myself." Eva listened. She felt the truth of his words, the terror of a man who controlled everything but could not control this. She lifted his hand, the one that had held her pulse, and placed it flat against her own chest, over her heart. "Then start," she said, her voice strong and clear in the quiet room, "by trusting me when the storm comes." The Halcyon greenhouse was a glass box of impossible wealth. suspended over the city's botanical gardens. Rain lashed against the glass roof, a deafening drum against the fragile, tropical paradise within. This was where Bastion's anchor council, the shadow shareholders of Carraro Holdings, met when blood was in the water. They were old money, new tech, and quiet power, and they were all looking at Eva as if she were a piece of dirt on a pristine ledger. "This is Miss Monroe," Bastion said, his voice cutting through the humid air. "She is my new consultant for ethical risk." A scoff came from Cade Lupo, the dock boss. "Ethical risk, is that what we're calling her?" "This is irregular. Bastion, she's a liability." "She is an asset," Bastion countered, his voice flat and cold, "because she sees the things we've all chosen to ignore." He nodded to Eva. Eva stepped forward, the drive from the data spine in her hand. She felt the weight of their scrutiny. She was not a part of their world, and that was her only weapon. She plugged the drive into the room's projector. "This," she said, as the file list for Project Mirror illuminated the screen, "is the liability, not me." She explained it clearly, clinically. The biometric algorithm, the medical deepfakes, the specific targeting of city residents. Sienna Quill stepped up beside her, a seamless transition. "My team analyzed the data, miss. Monroe retrieved. Project Mirror is a joint venture. NASC provides the raw data, stripped from citizen records. MOCD provides the legal framework to use it." She paused. "And Mile Rivera provides the access, laundering the payments through security contracts at the pier and shell accounts in our own charitable foundations." The air in the greenhouse turned frigid. Mile, who had been standing at the back, stepped into the light. He was not angry. He was perfectly, unnervingly calm. "A compelling story," Miles said, his voice smooth, "and a desperate one. Miss Monroe, a freelancer with a known history of instability, suddenly appears and makes these wild accusations. It's almost unbelievable. Unless, perhaps, she's not the victim she claims to be." He held up a small tablet. "I did my own diligence." An image flickered onto the screen. It was grainy, dark. It showed Ava, clearly, meeting with the leader of the Hallow Kings, accepting a package. "A deep fake," Ava said instantly, her voice ringing with authority. She walked to the screen. "You're getting better, Mile, but you're not there yet." She pointed. "See, the light source on my face is coming from the upper left, but the light on my hand, the one taking the package, is from a low, warmer source. You used 2 different clips. It's sloppy." Sienna Quill, without looking up from her own tablet, confirmed it. "My algorithm detects a 94% probability of a composite image. The artifacting is clear." Miles' smile did not falter, but a vein pulsed in his temple. The council erupted. The room split. One faction, led by an older investor, argued for containment. "This is a disaster. Give NASC the girl. Give them the child. Make this go away. Protect the assets." Another group, seeing the MOCD link, saw a deeper rot. They sided with Bastion. Eva saw her opening. "You're arguing about how to lose," she said, silencing the room. "You can't give NASC the girl because that's what they want. They want you to sacrifice an innocent to prove you're controllable." "Then what do you suggest, consultant?" Cade Lupo sneered. "A 2-pronged attack," Eva said. "Legal and illegal, public and private." She looked at Bastion, who gave a bare, affirmative nod. "First, Sienna and I will use the Bureau of Corporate Integrity. We feed them the mirror files, anonymously. The BCI hates NASC more than they fear you. They will open a civil investigation. That creates the public narrative." "And the second prong?" Bastion asked, though he already knew. "That's for Mile." Eva's eyes were cold. "Sienna found his shadow accounts. We don't just freeze them. We create a new, fake charity wallet, make it look like a new nasty venture, and we drain every cent he stole. We bleed him dry from the inside." The plan was audacious, a legal attack on City Hall filed anonymously, citing MOCD overreach, a street-level digital attack. protecting the data hubs at clinics and schools from Nazi's attempts to deport the servers. The council was silent. Finally, Bastian spoke. "We do it." He walked to Eva. From his inside pocket, he removed a simple black key card. It had no markings. He held it out to her. "What is it?" "The Velvet Key," he said. "It's a CEO-level access card. It opens every data file, every vault, every safe house. It overrides Mile. It overrides everyone but me." He pressed it into her hand. "You'll need it." It was a gesture of absolute trust, and it was not lost on the room, across the greenhouse. Mile Rivera's composure finally, visibly, cracked. His hand clenched into a fist. Later that night, Sienna brought a small, folded piece of paper to the lighthouse. It was from Nova, a crayon drawing of the lighthouse, with 2 stick figures and a small, smiling child. The letters were big and wobbly. N and M. Eva and Bastian. Bastian took the drawing. He said nothing. He simply folded it, once, and slid it into the inner pocket of his wallet, the one he kept closest to his chest. It was not for anyone else to see. It was his reason. The counterattack came less than 24 hours later. It was brutal. Nask, feeling the pressure from the BCI probe, went for the throat. They froze every primary account of Carraro Holdings, and a formal summons was delivered to Bastian Carraro. That night, Mile requested a private meeting with Bastian. "You're boxed in," Mile said, his voice a sympathetic poison. "But there is a way. One last deal. They don't want the company, Bastian, they just want the girl. Give them Eva Monroe. Sacrifice her. It's the only way to save the corporation." The rejection of Miles' offer was a death sentence. The reprisal came just before midnight. A 6-man team, clad in black tactical gear bearing counterfeit MOCD logos, used a hydraulic ram to breach the door of Eva's apartment. They found an empty space, dark and quiet. Sienna, methodical and paranoid, had moved Nova 3 hours earlier. The team fanned out, one man tripping a pressure plate hidden beneath a welcome mat in the kitchen. It was not a bomb. It was a pressurized dye pack, indelible. Neon pink ink exploded from the wall, coating the entire team. Simultaneously, a small camera, hidden in the cheap smoke detector, activated. It was not recording. It was live streaming the ink-covered MOCD team directly to a secure server at the Bureau of Corporate Integrity. Eva was already on the roof. She had heard the hydraulic hiss and the splintering wood. She ran, her feet crunching on the gravel, making for the rusted fire escape of the adjacent building. She was halfway down the clanging iron rungs when a silent shadow slid into the alley below. It was Bastian, mounted on a heavy, black electric motorcycle. It made no sound but the faintest whine of its motor and the hiss of wet tires. "Now, Eva," he yelled, his voice low but urgent. She did not wait. She launched herself from the ladder, a 10-foot drop. He caught her, his arm like a steel band, pulling her onto the seat behind him as the first pink-stained agents burst onto the roof above them. He accelerated. The bike shot forward, a silent torpedo, exploding from the alley onto the rain-slicked street. As they raced through the city, the digital billboards above them flickered. The news was breaking. The BCI, armed with the live stream, had just dropped the mirror documents. The files were redacted, blurring the children's names, but the implication was catastrophic. The city's activist network and tech journalists exploded, tearing the data apart. The legal attack was live. Bastian veered toward the docks, Cade Lupo's territory, a black SUV. The hit squad's transport fishtailed around the corner, gaining on them. "Hold on," Bastian shouted. He swerved into the container yard, a maze of steel canyons. He aimed the bike at a narrow ramp, sliding down into a lower bay. The SUV followed, scraping the walls. "Cade now," Bastian spoke into his wrist communicator. A shadow fell over them. High above, the 80-ton gantry crane whirred. Cade Lupo, at the controls, lifted a 40-foot container and, with a terrifying, precise swing, lowered it. It slammed onto the concrete path with an earth-shaking clang, completely blocking the SUV's path, a wall of steel. The squad piled out, weapons raised, trapped. "They're on comms," Eva said, her arms locked around Bastian's waist. "They'll find a way around." Bastian stopped the bike behind a stack of rusted barrels. "They need a minute. I don't need a minute," Eva said. She spotted a safety station on the wall. She jumped off the bike, grabbed the heavy plastic bullhorn, and switched it on. She did not yell. She keyed the siren, then immediately pressed the talk button, aiming the speaker at the squad. A high-pitched, agonizing feedback shriek tore through the air. The men collapsed, hands flying to their earpieces as the frequency overloaded their radios, jamming their communications. Eva's burner phone vibrated. "A text from Sienna Mile is on our internal channel, assisting Cade, listening in." Eva's eyes narrowed. She texted back, "What frequency is Mile using?" Sienna's reply was instant. Eva looked at the radio one of the agents had dropped. The frequency was stamped on the side. They matched. "Bastian," she said, her voice hollow. "I have him. Mile is broadcasting on the same frequency as the hit squad. He's running them." They abandoned the bike, escaping through a maintenance tunnel. Their destination was the Monarch Library, a fire-gutted husk of a building that Bastian's organization used as a hardened data station. The moment the heavy steel door boomed shut, sealing them in the dusty silence, the adrenaline broke. "You used us," Eva shoved Bastian, her voice cracking. "You knew they were coming. You left us in that apartment to be bait." "I knew they might," he yelled back, grabbing her shoulders, his own control snapping. I needed that camera feed to go live. I needed the BCI to have proof of MOCD at the scene." "You used my daughter's home," she screamed, tears of rage and terror finally breaking free. "She was never there. Eva, she was safe," he roared. "I would never risk her." "You don't get to decide that," she cried, hitting his chest. "You don't get to decide what risk is acceptable." The accusation struck him silent. He was right about the plan, but she was right about the cost. His anger vanished, replaced by a crushing weight. He pulled her against him, a rough, desperate embrace. She fought him for a second, then her hands clenched his jacket, and she just held on, her face buried in his shirt, shaking. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. "Bastian," she mumbled against his chest. "Get it." He kept one arm locked around her, pulling the phone out, a secure message from Sienna, one attached file. It was the lab report. Eva had agreed to it that morning. A swab from Nova's toothbrush. Bastian had given Sienna a single hair, one he'd kept in his wallet for 9 years. He read the text. Statistical markers, allele matches. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. Bastian's legs went weak. He did not fall, but he sagged against a towering, fire-scorched bookshelf, sliding to the dusty floor and pulling Eva down with him. He made no sound. He just stared at the screen as his shoulders began to shake. A single tear cut a clean path through the grime on his cheek. Then another. It was the silent, agonizing cry of a man who had walled off his heart, and the wall had just been pulverized. Eva watched him, her own rage dissolving into a shared, aching grief. She gently took the phone from his hand. She put her hand on the side of his face, her thumb brushing away a tear. "Bastian," she whispered. "B." He looked at her, his eyes shattered. "We tell her tomorrow," Eva said, her voice firm, an anchor in the storm. "We survived today. We tell her tomorrow." The city was in an uproar. The real MOCD, furious, held an emergency press conference, disavowing the criminal actors in the video. The BCI, sensing blood, pounced. They leveraged the public fury, forcing the city to schedule a full public hearing in 48 hours. In the shadows, Mile Rivera saw the timeline. He saw the DNA report. He knew the game was over. He had one last, desperate card to play. He began making calls. The annual Solstice Ball, Carraro's biggest charity gala, was in 2 days. It was the perfect stage for a public coup. The solstice ball was Carraro's crown jewel, a statement of power written in glass, steel, and shimmering light. The elite of Kingfisher Bay moved through the grand hall, their laughter mixing with the smooth, cool notes of a live jazz trio. Eva Monroe was a slash of black in the sea of sequins. Her dress was minimalist, almost severe, a practical choice. Beneath it, a wire ran from a hidden microphone to a transmitter in her small clutch. Bastian was classic, a dark tuxedo, his presence a counterweight to the room's frivolity. Pinned to his lapel was a small, heavy pin in the shape of an orchid. Miles away, in Sienna's safe house, Nova sat on a plush sofa, eating popcorn. She was watching the party's official live stream on a large television, waiting to see her mom before the party. Eva had slipped away. She'd called Nova, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "I have to go to work, baby. You stay with Sienna. I'll be back to hug you when it's over." "Okay, Mommy, don't forget." "I won't. I love you." Back at the gala, Mile Rivera took the stage, his smile broad, his bearing that of a civic hero. "We are here tonight," he began, "not just to celebrate, but to recommit to the safety and security of our community." As he spoke, a constellation of small, illuminated drones lifted from alcoves around the room. They danced in the air, a beautiful, high-tech display, converging over the center of the hall. They formed the shimmering logo of the Carraro Children's Foundation. The crowd applauded. Miles' voice hardened slightly. "Security is a promise we must keep, no matter the cost, a promise to our future." The drones shifted, the charity logo dissolved, the lights reconfigured. A new image formed, a high-resolution portrait 20 feet wide. It was Nova. Bastian froze. The blood left his face. It was not an attack. It was emotional vivisection, a public threat to the one thing he could not protect with money or guns. And in that moment of stunned silence, Miles' security team moved. They were not hotel guards. They were Miles' men, the same ones from the pier. They fanned out, their hands inside their jackets, securing the exits. Cade Lupo, posted near the main doors, saw the movement. He saw the bulge of a real weapon, not a security radio. "Bastian," he roared, a warning. It was too late. Mile made a small gesture from the stage. The main power was cut. The jazz music died. The lights, the music, everything vanished, plunging the hall into absolute, terrifying darkness. The screams began, but the drones remained lit. In the ensuing panic, Eva did not run for the doors. She ran for the wall, kicking off her heels. She grabbed the latticework of a lighting rig and began to climb, a shadow moving against the shadows. Mile had control of the room, but Eva had the velvet key. She pulled a small, modified tablet from her clutch as she climbed. She was high above the floor in seconds, clinging to the metal. She jacked into the drone's master control panel. The drones, still holding Nova's image, flickered. Mile, a flashlight cutting the dark, was searching for Bastian. "You're weak, old man," he shouted, his voice echoing. "You let a child make you weak." "The weak one is the man who hides in the dark. Mile," Bastian's voice replied, calm and cold, from a few yards away. Mile swung his light, and at the same time, the drones overhead burst to full brightness. They were not showing Nova anymore. They had become a single, massive screen, and on that screen, for every panicked guest to see, was the unredacted feed of Project Mirror, the data, the NASC contracts, the MOCD signatures. Ava, from her perch, had broadcast Miles' entire betrayal to the richest and most powerful people in the city. Miles screamed in rage. He saw Bastian, a silhouette against the streaming data. He raised his arm. He had a gun. "She made you weak." He fired. Ava, dropping from the rig, slammed into Miles' side. She was not trying to stop him, just to spoil his aim. Her momentum threw his arm off. The shot was wild. It flew across the room, striking Bastian square in the chest. It hit the orchid pin. The heavy metal deflected the bullet, which ricocheted into the ceiling. A shower of sparks and plaster rained down like falling stars. Bastien did not pause. He lunged, not at Maël, but at the service door Maël had been guarding. Maël, his plan in ruins, turned and fled through it, toward the roof. Bastien was right behind him. Eva followed, landing hard, scrambling to her feet. The roof was a landscape of steel, wet with rain. Bastien and Maël, two shadows, were locked in a brutal, hand-to-hand fight. Maël broke free, grabbing a loose piece of scaffolding, and swung it. Eva burst through the door. She saw the fight, and she saw Bastien dodge the metal pipe. She looked around, frantic, and saw a heavy-duty anchor cable hooked to the skylight cleaning rig. The skylight itself was locked. She did not hesitate. She grabbed a discarded wrench from a nearby toolbox and smashed the lock. She freed the heavy cabled hook and, with all her strength, threw it. Bastien, he saw the cable skidding across the roof. He grabbed it just as Maël lunged again. Maël, expecting a fist, met the heavy steel hook instead. Bastien used the cable as a flail, wrapping it around Maël's weapon. He twisted. Maël, desperate, overbalanced. He slipped on the wet roof. He went over the edge. He did not fall. He caught a low-hanging girder, his legs dangling over the 30-story drop. He was trapped. "Ah, Bastien, wait!" he shrieked, his voice thin with terror. "Don't I have it, the full deal, the NASC agreement, their entire network?" He fumbled with his other hand, tapping his smartwatch. "It's all here. Just pull me up. We can still win. Pull me up." Bastien walked to the edge. He looked down at the man who had threatened his child, who had tried to kill him. He did not pull him up. He did not push him off. He planted his foot firmly on Maël's hand, pinning him to the girder. He held him there, not with anger, with cold, absolute control. The wail of sirens grew louder. The real MOCD, forced into action by the BCI and the live feed, were storming the building. Bastien, the Don of Kingfisher Bay, looked down at his consigliere and kept him pinned, waiting for the police. He had made his choice. He would not give Maël a martyr's death or a killer's justice. He would give him a cold, legal cell. Below, the emergency lights in the ballroom snapped on. The guests stood in stunned silence, staring at the frozen data on the drone screen. Then, one by one, the drones broke formation. They climbed, punching through the smashed skylight, rising into the night sky. They burst into brilliant, white flares, a signal of victory, burning out the darkness. The morning after the solstice ball was quiet. The winter storm that had lashed the city had passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean, the sky a fragile, crystalline blue. They were in Sienna's personal sanctuary, a sprawling orange grove under a glass atrium, a hidden pocket of warmth. The air smelled of citrus blossoms and damp earth. Novanda, who had been brought there early, was chasing a butterfly, her laughter echoing softly. Bastien found her near a small fountain. Eva stood a dozen feet away, near Sienna, watching. Her posture was tense, her hands clasped. She gave him a small, tense nod. "Go on." Bastien knelt, a gesture that seemed foreign to his large frame, bringing him down to Nova's level. He was not wearing a suit. He was in a simple cashmere sweater, his left arm in a sling from where he had strained it in the fight on the roof. He held out his right hand. In his palm was the orchid pin, its silver surface blackened and warped where the bullet had struck it. "I have a scar, like you," he said, his voice rough, unsteady, and a heart that wants to learn how to be a dad. Nova looked at the burnt pin. She looked at Bastien's face, at his eyes, which were open and vulnerable, and held a terrifying amount of hope. She stepped forward. She gently touched the pin with one finger. Then, she reached up and her small fingers touched the collar of his shirt, just above the faint line of his own scar. Finally, she touched the identical spot on her own chest. She did not ask about the pin. She did not ask about the fight. She accepted the truth as a simple, physical fact. "Dad," she said, the word simple, as if she had always known it. "Do you like watching storms?" Bastian's breath caught. He looked up, his eyes meeting Eva's over their daughter's head. He saw her tears, silent and sudden, and he felt his own. He looked back at Nova. "Yes," he choked out, the word thick. "I do, if I am with you too." Eva had held her breath, her hands fisted at her sides. She had prepared for confusion, for tears, for rejection. She had been ready to step in, to mediate. But this was not a decision to be mediated. It was Nova's to make. Nova looked from Bastian back to her, her expression serious. Then she smiled. She did not just hug him. She launched herself forward, her small arms wrapping around Bastian's neck, and then she reached one hand out, grabbing Eva's. "Both!" she demanded. Eva stepped forward, kneeling beside them, her arm coming around her daughter, her other hand resting on Bastian's back. The three of them, a strange, broken, and suddenly real family, knelt in the sunlight, the decision made. Later, after Nova was busy drawing her new family, Bastian and Eva spoke privately. He was formal, almost nervous. "I want a chance, Eva," he said. "A formal one, to co-parent. I've had Sienna draw up a schedule. It keeps her in her school. It doesn't disrupt her life. My time, my responsibility, and 100% private. No social media, no pictures, no public statements. She is not, and never will be, part of the Carraro brand." Eva listened. He was offering her rules, contracts, the very language he understood. "That is a start," she said. The city, meanwhile, was demanding its own accounting. The BCI hearing was swift. Eva, identified only as a data consultant who had broken the case, testified. She spoke clinically about Project Mirror, not as a mother whose child was targeted, but as an expert. She framed it as a systemic danger to every family, a breach of data trust that put all children at risk. Bastian's testimony was blunt. He did not make excuses. He admitted to flawed governance, to a corporate structure that was blind, and to a personal failure in trusting mail, which allowed the rot to fester. The 1-2 punch of their testimonies was devastating. The real MOCD, desperate to distance itself from the scandal, publicly joined forces with the BCI. They announced the formation of a new joint task force, the Harbor Integrity Unit, its sole purpose to investigate and dismantle NASC, root and stem. The Orchid Syndicate, an entity of shadow and fear, could not survive the light. Bastian, with Sienna and Cade, began the painful process of dismantling it. Sienna was given a new title, Chief Ethics Officer and veto power over all Carraro contracts. Cade Lupo, gruff and pragmatic, took over the docks with a new mandate: fair wages, union contracts, and new labor standards. The Orchid Syndicate died. The Orchid Network, a corporation focused on protecting community assets, was born from its ashes. Bastian's final piece of business was with Eva. "I need a consultant," he said, sitting across from her at the lighthouse. "For ethical and image risk, I need someone who is not afraid of me, who sees the things I do not. A permanent, long-term contract. Name your price." Eva looked at him. "One condition. You will never use my past for your PR. I am not your redemption story. I am not the intern who fled. I am your consultant. Or I am nothing." Bastian nodded. Agreed. That night, the new, strange family was at the Hesper Lighthouse. The storm had passed, leaving the sky clear as glass, the stars brilliant. Nova, in her pajamas, was looking out the massive arched window. "When the next storm comes," Nova declared, "we should have pizza and watch a movie about tornadoes. It can be our storm night." Bastian and Eva, standing behind her, looked at each other, a family, built on a new, small ritual. The winter sky was perfectly clear, holding its breath, leaving a quiet space for the love that had finally been spoken. The fragile peace lasted less than 24 hours. NASC, now cornered and designated a rogue entity, lashed out. A video clip surfaced, disseminated through a dozen dark channels. It was a vicious deep fake, expertly crafted. It showed grainy, distorted footage of Bastion looking menacing, Eva screaming, and a blurred, crying image of Nova. The audio was a nightmare. Spliced, "You will obey," "The family demands," "Consequences." The media labeled it Mafia Parenting. But the Harbor Integrity Unit, the BCI MOCD task force, was now a legitimized and hungry beast. They were not fooled. They traced the upload. It was not a corporate server. It was a ghost signal, bouncing from a defunct municipal maintenance hub, deep in the flooded service tunnels beneath the Liliath Bridge. "It's a trap," Sienna said, her voice tight over the comms. They were gathered at the BCI command center. "The data is wiping. They've rigged the hub to blow. They are not just destroying the evidence, they are trying to bury it under a bridge." "I'm going," Bastion said. "We're going," Eva corrected him, zipping up a tactical vest. "That clip was about me, too. They put my daughter's image on that screen. I'm finishing this." Bastion looked at her, at the steel in her eyes. He did not argue. The operation was a three-pronged spear. Cade Lupo, controlling the water, locked down the river with 3 of his fastest boats, a hard, floating perimeter. Sienna remained at the command center, a digital overwatch, ready to catch any data that bled out. Bastion and Eva led a small, grim-faced team into the darkness. The tunnels smelled of rust, river silt, and ozone. They found the server hub. It was a concrete bunker, and in the center, a digital clock, glowing red, was counting down 10 minutes. "It's worse than we thought," the BCI engineer in Eva's earpiece said, his voice tinny. "The servers are rigged, but so are the structural supports. They're trying to collapse the tunnel." "Eva, you and the team get the civilians out," Bastion ordered. "No," Eva pointed. "Look, the main server rack. There's a secondary charge. It's not on the timer, it's analog. A pressure plate. They're trying to catch us." "I'll disarm it," the BCI tech said. "You can't," Eva said, her eyes tracing the wires. "It's not networked, but I can." She moved before Bastion could stop her. "Talk to me," she snapped into her mic. "Eva, no!" Bastion roared. "It's a 3-wire system," the tech yelled. "You have to bypass the pressure sensor before you cut the main loop. If you cut the red first, it blows." Eva's hands, the steady hands of a photographer, got to work. Her world shrank to 3 colored wires and the voice in her ear. "Bastion, the supports," one of the agents yelled. "They're failing." 2 minutes, Sienna's voice, strained. Bastion was not looking at the clock. He was looking up. A heavy, rusted girder above Eva was groaning, tearing loose from the ceiling. "Eva, move!" I have the bypass." He did not shout. He did not wait. He moved. He threw his entire body at her, a human shield. He shoved her, hard, against the solid concrete base of the server rack. The world exploded in noise and dust. The girder smashed down onto the exact spot where she had been standing. Bastion roared in pain, a sharp, tearing sound. A secondary piece of rebar, ripped free by the impact, had struck his shoulder, tearing through the vest and deep into the muscle. He did not move, his body shielding hers, pinning her in place. "Status, Eva! Status!" Sienna screamed. The comms filled with static. Eva, pressed under Bastion's weight, her face against the concrete, looked at the detonator. Her hand was still there. The wire was cut. "I'm clear," she choked out. "The charge is dead." "Bastion?" "I'm fine," he grunted, the lie obvious, his blood already soaking through his shirt. "Get the data. Get it now." The BCI tech's voice was filled with a sudden, breathless awe. "We don't have to. The fail-safe. The moment the analog charge was disarmed, the backup system kicked in. It's not wiping, it's uploading. It is uploading everything. The entire NASC Black Book. It's going public. Now." Across Kingfisher Bay, on every phone, on every news ticker, on the giant public billboards, the truth began to stream. The final climax was not an explosion. It was an unstoppable flood of information. The wail of sirens grew. Cade's team was breaking the locks, and the tunnel began to flood, the river reclaiming its territory. Bastian was leaning heavily against the wall, clutching his shoulder, as Eva's phone, the one he had given her, buzzed in her pocket. It was Nova, from Sienna's. Eva's hands were shaking too much. She held the phone up to Bastian. He took it, his good hand slick with his own blood. "Hey," he rasped. "Dad, Mom said you were working. There are sirens. I'm scared." He closed his eyes. A painful, exhausted smile touched his lips. "It's okay. Dad, Bastian is scared too," he admitted, the words torn from his soul. "But he's coming home. I'm coming home." There was a pause, then her small, serious voice. "I'm scared too. But Mom taught me to breathe deep. You should too. Dad." "Okay," Bastian whispered. "Okay, I will. I love you." They emerged into the flashing red and blue lights, covered in grime and blood, as the river rushed in to bury the last of NASC's secrets. Before sunrise, NASC was temporarily, and then permanently, disbanded by federal order. Mal Rivera, facing a mountain of digital evidence, took a plea deal that buried him in the federal system for 30 years. That night at the lighthouse, the storm was gone. A doctor, procured by Sienna, finished stitching Bastian's shoulder. It was deep, but it would heal. When the doctor left, Eva came in. Bastian was sitting by the fire, bare-chested, the new stitches a stark, angry red on his skin. She knelt beside him, holding a fresh bandage and antiseptic. She said nothing. She gently cleaned the wound, her touch methodical. "Sure." She placed the white gauze over the stitches, and then she leaned in. She did not kiss his lips. She did not kiss his face. She pressed a soft, warm kiss directly onto the bandage, a seal, an act of pure, quiet care, a promise. He watched her, his eyes heavy. "I love you," he said. It was not a question. It was not a declaration. It was a fact, proven by fire, by water, and by blood. Eva met his gaze, her hand resting on his good shoulder. "I love you too." She smiled, a small, tired smile. "And tomorrow we are going to tell our daughter that all three of us are going storm watching together." The final scene was not an ending, but a beginning. A bright, windy afternoon on the coast, Nova, strapped safely into a harness, was running, laughing around the wide railed catwalk of the lighthouse, her arms spread wide to the wind. Below, Eva and Bastian stood leaning against the warm stone, their shoulders touching. They were not watching the sea, they were watching her. The bright sun caught them, glinting on two pale, crescent-shaped scars, one on his collarbone, one just visible at the collar of her shirt. They were not flaws, they were not marks of pain, they were the signatures of their fate. Their love did not erase the past, it taught them to use it as a compass. Storms would still come, but now they had each other to watch them and walk through them. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to the Mafia Boss Story channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.